Sarah Chen placed the last of her personal items into the shipping container. Her hands moved slowly, carefully wrapping each object before setting it inside. The small Earth globe that had sat on her desk for 3 years. The photo of her family back on Mars colony. The wooden pen holder her daughter had made in school. Each item told a story of humanity's time on Nexus Prime. The office felt empty now. The walls that once displayed certificates of cooperation between Earth and the Galactic Council were bare. The shelves that held gifts from various alien species stood vacant. Even the translator device that had helped her communicate with dozens of different races was packed away. Ambassador Chen had served as humanity's voice in the Council for 8 years. She had spoken for Earth, Mars, the Jupiter stations, and all the human colonies scattered across known space. She had negotiated trade deals, settled disputes, and worked to build bridges between her species and the galaxy's older civilizations. But today, she was leaving. Down the hall, she could hear the Veltar delegation talking in their melodic language. These tall, blue-skinned beings prided themselves on their vast knowledge and ancient wisdom. They had been part of the Galactic Council for over 2,000 years. Their libraries contained the history of hundreds of worlds. In the opposite direction, the heavy footsteps of the Kethmaran warriors echoed through the corridors. These massive, scaled beings had built their reputation on honor and strength. Their warships protected Council space from pirates and raiders. They spoke of glory and tradition with voices that could shake buildings. The Zephyrians moved like whispers through the embassy halls. These graceful, nearly transparent beings had perfected the art of diplomacy over millennia. They could negotiate peace between warring species and find compromise where none seemed possible. Their words could calm the angriest hearts, and somewhere in the upper levels of the Great Tower the architects waited. These ancient energy beings had founded the Council long before any of the younger races had even discovered fire. They appeared as shifting patterns of light and spoke in thoughts rather than words. They claimed to guide the galaxy toward a better future. All of them had watched humanity's rise with interest. Humans were young, barely 300 years into space travel. They were curious, adaptable, and surprisingly creative. They could fix problems that had puzzled other species for centuries. They could make old technology work in new ways. They could find solutions that nobody else had considered, but they were also unpredictable. They asked uncomfortable questions. They challenged old ways of thinking. They wanted to try things that had never been attempted before. Some council members found this exciting. Others found it dangerous. For 7 years running, humanity had applied for full membership in the Galactic Council. For 7 years, they had been denied. The reasons changed each time, but the result remained the same. Humans could participate in council activities. They could trade with member species. They could even send representatives to council meetings. But they could not vote on important decisions. They could not propose new laws. They remained junior partners in galactic civilization. The final vote had taken place just 3 days ago. Ambassador Chen had presented humanity's case once more. She had shown the Council all the ways humans had contributed to galactic society, the new farming techniques that had solved food shortages on 6 different worlds, the medical breakthroughs that had saved millions of alien lives, the engineering innovations that had improved space travel for everyone. The Council had listened politely. They had asked their usual questions about human unpredictability and dangerous creativity. They had expressed their familiar concerns about humanity's rapid expansion and military potential. Then they had voted just as they had 6 times before. The Veltar had voted no, citing humanity's insufficient maturity. The Kethmaran had voted no, worried about human military ambitions. The Zephyrians had abstained, calling the decision premature. Only a few smaller species had supported humanity's application. When the results were announced, Ambassador Chen had not argued. She had not given an angry speech about unfairness or discrimination. She had not threatened to withdraw human cooperation from council projects. She had simply stood up, nodded politely to the assembly and said, "We understand. Good day." Those words had surprised everyone. In previous years, human representatives had always asked for explanations. They had requested specific criteria for future applications. They had pushed for compromise solutions or probationary memberships. This time there had been no negotiations, no debates, no attempts to change minds. Ambassador Chen had returned to her office and begun packing immediately. The news had spread quickly through the embassy district. Other species representatives had come to visit, expecting to find angry humans planning their response. Instead, they found calm, efficient preparation for departure. Human staff members were closing down offices, transferring files to local databases, and making arrangements to leave Nexus Prime. Dr. Martinez from the Medical Exchange Program was ending his research projects early. Commander Thompson was recalling human military advisors from joint training exercises. Trade Representative Wilson was canceling upcoming negotiations for new commercial agreements. Everyone was pulling back from council activities with the same quiet determination. The other species began to worry. The Veltar scholar Zethis came to Chen's office personally, something that rarely happened. The proud academic wanted to know if humanity was planning some kind of retaliation. Chen had simply smiled and said that humans were choosing to focus their efforts elsewhere. Keth Moran war leader Gorath had been more direct. He had demanded to know if humanity was planning to attack council space. Chen had assured him that humans had no hostile intentions toward any council member. They were simply redirecting their resources toward other opportunities. Even the Zephyrians had sent representatives, worried about the diplomatic implications of humanity's withdrawal. They offered to mediate discussions about future membership applications. Chen had thanked them politely but explained that humanity was no longer interested in council membership. The most unusual visit had come from an architect. The energy being had manifested in Chen's office as a swirling pattern of golden light. Its thoughts had pressed gently against her mind, asking why humanity was abandoning the path toward galactic unity. Chen had thought back that humanity still believed in unity, but they had different ideas about how to achieve it. Now, as Chen sealed the last shipping container, she looked around her empty office one final time. Through the wide windows, she could see the great city of Nexus Prime stretching to the horizon. Thousands of different species lived and worked together here, united under the Council's ancient laws and traditions. It was an impressive achievement, she had to admit. But it was also limited. The Council moved slowly, bound by centuries of precedent and protocol. New ideas faced endless committees and reviews. Change came in tiny, careful steps that often took decades to implement. Humanity had different strengths. They adapted quickly. They embraced change. They took risks that others found frightening. They built connections based on mutual respect rather than formal hierarchy. These qualities had made them valuable partners to the Council, but they had also made them too dangerous to trust with real power. Chen activated her personal communicator and sent a message to Earth Command. Nexus Prime Embassy officially closed. All human personnel departing as scheduled. Beginning Phase 2 immediately. Phase 2. The other Council species would learn what that meant soon enough. Chen picked up her travel bag and walked toward the door. She did not look back at the empty office. She did not feel sad about leaving. There was too much work ahead to waste time on regrets. In the corridors, she passed groups of alien representatives who watched her go with uncertain expressions. Some nodded respectfully. Others whispered among themselves in their native languages. A few tried to start conversations about the future of human-council relations. Chen was polite but brief with all of them. There was nothing left to discuss. Humanity had made its choice. As she reached the embassy's main entrance, Chen paused to remove the small sign that read, Human Embassy to the Galactic Council. She handed it to the building's Zephyrian administrator, who accepted it with trembling fingers. Ambassador, the administrator whispered, surely this is not the end of human participation in galactic civilization. Chen smiled. Not the end. Just a new beginning. She walked out into the bright Nexus Prime sunshine where a human transport waited to take her to the spaceport. Other human staff members were already loading their belongings aboard similar vehicles. In a few hours they would all be gone. The Council would continue its work without them. The galaxy would keep turning, and somewhere among the distant stars humanity would build something new. 6 months had passed since the last human transport departed Nexus Prime. The Galactic Council had continued its work as if nothing had changed. Committee meetings proceeded on schedule. Trade negotiations moved forward. Diplomatic protocols remained in place, but small problems were beginning to appear. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, the automated extraction systems had started running 20% below optimal efficiency. The Veltar engineers who managed the facility could not determine why. All the equipment appeared to be functioning normally. The AI systems reported no errors. Yet somehow, the carefully balanced processes that had run smoothly for years were now sluggish and ineffective. The truth was simple. Human technicians had quietly modified the control algorithms over the past 2 years, making tiny improvements that added up to significant gains. When they left, they had not sabotaged anything. They had simply taken their knowledge with them. The systems reverted to their original specifications, which everyone had forgotten were inadequate. Similar problems appeared across Council space. Trade routes that had operated with clockwork precision began experiencing delays. Cargo ships arrived hours or days behind schedule. Supplies reached their destinations, but not when expected. The complex logistics network that connected hundreds of worlds started showing signs of strain. The Zephyrian Commerce Guild investigated the disruptions. Their analysis revealed an uncomfortable truth. Human trade coordinators had been quietly optimizing shipping schedules for years. They had found ways to move goods faster and cheaper than anyone thought possible. Their departure had not broken the trade network, but it had made everything slower and more expensive. Medical research faced even more serious difficulties. The Interspecies Health Consortium had depended heavily on human researchers who specialized in finding connections between different alien physiologies. Dr. Sarah Kim had developed new treatments for Kethmaran bone diseases by studying human healing factors. Dr. James Park had created vaccines for Veltar children by adapting human immune responses. Dr. Lisa Wong had solved a genetic disorder among Zephyrian youth by borrowing techniques from human gene therapy. When these researchers withdrew from Council space, their ongoing projects ground to a halt. Other species scientists tried to continue the work, but they lacked the human ability to see patterns across biological boundaries. Promising treatments remained unfinished. New diseases went unstudied. The medical consortium's research output dropped by 40%. The most serious problems appeared on the frontier colonies. These were the newest settlements established on worlds at the edge of Council space. Many had been planned jointly by human and alien colonists, combining different species' strengths to create successful communities. The farming colony on Tau Ceti had been designed around human agricultural techniques adapted for the planet's unusual soil chemistry. When the human advisors left, the alien colonists tried to maintain the farms using their own traditional methods. The crops began failing. Soil nutrients became unbalanced. What had been a thriving agricultural center started producing barely enough food to feed its own population. The industrial complex on Wolf 359b faced similar challenges. Human engineers had designed hybrid manufacturing systems that combined Kethmaran heavy industry with Veltar precision technology. Without human maintenance crews who understood both systems, the factories began experiencing equipment failures. Production dropped. Quality control problems multiplied. Several facilities shut down entirely. Most concerning was the situation on the research station orbiting Proxima Centauri. This facility had been humanity's proudest contribution to Council science. Human and alien researchers had worked together to study the galaxy's most dangerous phenomena: black holes, neutron stars, and the mysterious dark matter that filled empty space. The station had been evacuated 3 months after the human withdrawal, not because of any immediate danger, but because the alien staff could not operate the complex systems that kept them safe. Human engineers had designed radiation shielding that adapted to different types of cosmic events. They had created gravity generators that could be quickly adjusted for different species' needs. They had built communication arrays that could function near massive gravitational distortions. Without humans to maintain these systems, the other species had decided the risks were too great. They shut down the most advanced research facility in known space rather than risk a catastrophic accident. On Nexus Prime, Veltar Prime scholar Zethys began investigating these problems with growing concern. As one of the Council's most respected scientists, Zethys had access to detailed records of every facility experiencing difficulties. The pattern became clear after weeks of careful analysis. Humans had been involved in almost every aspect of Council operations, not as leaders or decision-makers, but as problem-solvers and innovators. They had found ways to make old systems work better. They had designed new approaches to persistent challenges. They had served as bridges between different species' technologies and methodologies. Their contributions had been so gradual and subtle that most other species had barely noticed. A small improvement here, a minor optimization there. Over the years, these tiny changes had accumulated into major advantages. The Council's civilization had become more efficient, more productive, and more capable than ever before. Now those advantages were disappearing. Zethus presented the findings to the Council leadership during a closed session. The response was mixed. Some representatives argued that the problems were temporary. Other species would adapt. New solutions would be found. The Council had existed for thousands of years before humans arrived, and it would continue to exist after they were gone. Others were less optimistic. War leader Gorath of the Kethmaran pointed out that the frontier colonies were becoming vulnerable to pirate attacks. Without human-designed defense systems, they could not protect themselves effectively. Several outposts had already been abandoned. The Zephyrian diplomats worried about the economic implications. Trade disruptions were causing shortages on some worlds and surpluses on others. Political tensions were rising as different species blamed each other for the problems. The careful balance that had maintained peace for centuries was beginning to shift. Even the ancient architects seemed concerned. During one of their rare direct communications, they had asked pointed questions about humanity's current activities. Long-range sensors had detected massive human fleet movements toward the galactic rim. Entire population centers were being relocated to unexplored regions of space. What were humans doing out there? Why had they moved so far from established trade routes and communication networks? The Council's attempts to contact human leadership had been met with polite but firm responses. Humanity appreciates the Council's interest but is currently focused on internal development projects. The phrase internal development projects had appeared in every human communication for the past 6 months. It was diplomatic language that revealed nothing while suggesting everything. Humans were building something, but they were not sharing details with their former colleagues. As the problems multiplied, some council members began suggesting that they should reach out to humanity more directly. Perhaps the door was still open for renewed cooperation. Maybe humans would be willing to return if they were offered better terms. These suggestions were quickly dismissed by the council's leadership. The Veltar argued that approaching humanity now would make the council appear weak and desperate. The Kethmaran insisted that the galaxy's greatest military power should not beg for help from a junior species. The Zephyrians worried that any overtures might be seen as admission that the council had made a mistake. So the council continued trying to solve its problems without human assistance. Veltar scientists worked to reverse engineer human innovations. Kethmaran engineers attempted to recreate human manufacturing techniques. Zephyrian diplomats tried to renegotiate trade agreements to account for increased costs and delays. Progress was slow. Some problems were solved, but others kept appearing. The Council's vast bureaucracy was not designed for rapid adaptation. Changes required committee approval, regulatory review, and legislative ratification. What humans had accomplished with creative thinking and flexible implementation now required months or years of formal procedures. Meanwhile, the long-range sensor reports continued to arrive. Human fleets were spreading across dozens of star systems beyond the galactic rim. They were building stations, establishing colonies, and apparently making contact with unknown species. The scope of their activities suggested a level of organization and purpose that surprised even their former colleagues. Zethus spent long hours studying the sensor data, trying to understand what humanity was creating in the unexplored regions of space. The energy signatures suggested massive construction projects. The communication patterns indicated coordination between multiple fleets across hundreds of light years. The resource extraction activities implied permanent settlement rather than temporary exploration. Whatever humans were building, it was big. And they were building it without any input from the species that had denied them full membership in galactic civilization. The first reports came from the outer monitoring stations. Strange objects had appeared at the edge of council space, moving in patterns that defied conventional physics. They were too large to be ships and too organized to be natural phenomena. The automated sensors recorded basic data before the signals stopped transmitting entirely. Deep Space Monitor Station Alpha 7 was the first to investigate. The crew of 12 Veltar scientists approached the anomalous readings with typical scholarly caution. They deployed sensor probes and established communication protocols. They recorded detailed observations and followed standard procedures for first contact with unknown phenomena. The station's final transmission lasted exactly 14 seconds. Unknown objects are mechanical in nature. They appear to be consuming our probe ships. Defensive systems are not responding. The objects are approaching our position. They are not responding to any communication attempts. Request immediate assistance from, then silence. The Council's response was swift but measured. A Kethmaran battle squadron was dispatched to investigate. These were experienced warriors who had faced pirates, rebels, and various alien threats throughout their careers. They approached the area where Alpha 7 had been located with weapons ready and shields raised. They found nothing. No space station, no debris field, no trace that anything had ever existed in that region of space. Even the asteroids that had provided raw materials for the station's construction were gone. The entire area was empty except for a few strange particles that their sensors could not identify. War leader Gorath himself took command of the investigation. He ordered full-spectrum scans of the surrounding space, looking for any clue about what had happened to Alpha 7. The results were disturbing. The missing matter had not been destroyed in any conventional sense. It appeared to have been disassembled at the molecular level and transformed into something else. Before Gorath could complete his analysis, the second attack began. The objects appeared without warning, emerging from what seemed to be empty space. They were geometric shapes the size of small moons, covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Thousands of smaller craft swarmed around them like insects around a hive. Everything moved with perfect coordination, as if controlled by a single mind. The Kethmaran fleet opened fire immediately. Their plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes struck the alien objects with enough force to shatter planets. The weapons had no visible effect. The strange geometric forms continued their approach without slowing or changing course. Their smaller craft began to respond. What followed was unlike any battle in recorded history. The alien vessels did not use conventional weapons. Instead, they seemed to reach out and touch the Kethmaran ships, causing them to simply stop functioning. Engines went dead. Weapons shut down. Life support systems failed. One by one, the great warships became lifeless hulks drifting in space. Gorath managed to escape with only 3 ships out of his original fleet of 30. His battle report sent shockwaves through the Council leadership. The enemy was unlike anything they had encountered before. It absorbed and converted matter on a massive scale. It operated with perfect coordination across vast distances, and it appeared to be utterly immune to conventional attacks. The Veltar scholars quickly began analyzing the data from the encounter. They identified the enemy as a form of mechanical life, possibly artificial intelligence on a scale never before imagined. The geometric objects appeared to be mobile factories that could break down any form of matter and rebuild it according to their own designs. The smaller craft were probably specialized units for different functions: scouting, harvesting, construction, and defense. Most disturbing was the evidence of adaptive learning. The alien swarm had analyzed Kethmaran weapon systems during the battle and developed countermeasures in real time. Each successive attack had been less effective than the last. If the enemy encountered the same weapons again, they would likely be completely useless. The Council designated the threat as the Void Swarm and began preparing a coordinated response. This was exactly the kind of crisis that the Galactic Council had been created to handle. Multiple species would combine their strengths to face a common enemy. Ancient protocols were activated. Emergency powers were granted to military commanders. The galaxy's greatest civilizations prepared for war. The Kethmaran mobilized their entire fleet, calling back ships from peacekeeping missions across Council space. Their heavy cruisers and battleships represented the most powerful military force in known history. War leader Gorath developed new tactics based on his encounter with the swarm, emphasizing mobility and hit-and-run attacks over direct confrontation. The Veltar contributed their scientific expertise, working around the clock to develop new weapons and defensive systems. They studied the energy patterns recorded during the first battle. looking for weaknesses in the enemy's technology. They created new types of ammunition designed to disrupt the swarm's apparent ability to convert matter. The Zephyrians used their diplomatic skills to coordinate the war effort. They managed logistics, organized supply lines, and ensured that different species' military units could work together effectively. They also attempted to establish communication with the Void Swarm, hoping to find some way to negotiate or understand the enemy's intentions. Even the architects emerged from their usual isolation to help with the crisis. These ancient energy beings shared weapons technology that had been secret for millennia. They provided strategic advice based on their vast experience. They created shields and barriers that could protect entire star systems from attack. For 6 months, the combined Council forces seemed to be holding the line. The Void Swarm's advance slowed as it encountered organized resistance. Several enemy formations were destroyed or forced to retreat. The military commanders began to believe they could contain the threat and eventually drive it back into deep space. They were wrong. The Swarm had been learning. Every battle provided new information about Council capabilities. Every weapon that was used gave the enemy data about its construction and operation. Every tactic that was employed was analyzed and countered. The mechanical intelligence behind the invasion was studying its opponents with ruthless efficiency. When the Swarm resumed its advance, it had adapted to every strategy the Council had developed. Kethmaran hit-and-run tactics were predicted and intercepted. Veltar weapons were absorbed and turned against their creators. Zephyrian coordination networks were hacked and used to spread confusion instead of orders. Even architect technology was analyzed and replicated by the enemy. Worlds began to fall. Not just military targets, but entire civilizations. The Swarm would arrive in a star system and systematically break down everything: planets, moons, asteroids, space stations, and ships. All matter was converted into more Swarm units. All technology was studied and incorporated. All resistance was noted and prepared for. The refugees came in waves. Billions of beings fled their homeworlds as the Void Swarm consumed everything they had built over thousands of years. The Council's core systems became overcrowded with displaced populations. Resources were stretched to the breaking point. Fear and desperation began to replace the confidence that had marked the early stages of the war. On Nexus Prime, emergency sessions of the Council became daily occurrences. Representatives demanded explanations for the military failures. They argued about resource allocation and evacuation priorities. They blamed each other for strategic mistakes and tactical errors. The unity that had been the Council's greatest strength began to fracture under the pressure. Prime Scholar Zethus worked desperately to find a solution. The Veltar archives contained records of thousands of different civilizations and their technologies. Surely somewhere in that vast database was information that could help defeat the Swarm. But every promising lead ended in disappointment. The enemy seemed to have anticipated every possible approach. As the situation became more desperate, some Council members began asking uncomfortable questions. Had they exhausted all possible resources? Were there any allies they had not contacted? Any technologies they had not tried? Any strategies they had not considered? War leader Gorath was the first to say what others were thinking. What about the humans? The suggestion caused an immediate uproar. The Veltar representatives argued that humanity had made their position clear by withdrawing from Council space. The Zephyrians worried that approaching humans now would show weakness. Some members insisted that a junior species could not provide help that the galaxy's greatest civilizations could not manage themselves. But as reports arrived of more worlds falling to the Swarm, the arguments began to lose force. The Council's pride mattered less than survival. Their traditions seemed less important than stopping an enemy that threatened to consume everything. Finally, after much debate, the Council authorized a delegation to seek contact with humanity. It would be an unofficial approach, led by junior representatives, carefully worded to avoid any appearance of desperation. They would simply inquire about human willingness to share information about the threat, nothing more. The delegation's ship departed Nexus Prime on a course for the last known human positions near the Galactic Rim. The Council delegation ship emerged from hyperspace at the coordinates where human activity had last been detected. What they found defied all expectations. Spread across 3 star systems was a civilization unlike anything in galactic records. Massive space stations orbited every planet, connected by streams of cargo ships and passenger transports. Orbital shipyards were constructing vessels of unknown design. Mining operations stripped asteroids with impossible efficiency. Energy collectors drew power directly from the local stars. But most surprising was the diversity. The communication channels buzzed with dozens of different languages. Ship designs showed influences from at least 20 species, most of which the Council had never encountered. Energy signatures indicated technologies that combined familiar principles in completely new ways. The delegation's ship was intercepted by a patrol squadron before it could approach any of the major installations. The vessels that surrounded them were clearly human in origin, but they had been modified with alien components. Weapon systems showed crystalline elements that suggested Veltar influence. Shield generators displayed energy patterns similar to architect technology. Engine configurations incorporated designs from species the Council had never seen. Unknown vessel, this is Commander Sarah Thompson of the Human Alliance Defense Force, came the communication. Please state your business in our space. The delegation's leader, Veltar diplomat Zethis Ka, responded carefully. We are representatives of the Galactic Council, seeking to establish contact with human leadership regarding a matter of urgent importance to all species. There was a long pause before the reply came. Please follow our ships to Processing Station Gamma. You will be able to meet with Alliance representatives there. The flight to the processing station revealed even more surprises. The delegation passed colonies that clearly housed multiple species living and working together. They saw agricultural platforms where human farmers worked alongside tall, spindly beings that looked like walking trees. They observed manufacturing complexes where humans and crystalline entities seemed to be collaborating on advanced technology projects. Processing Station Gamma was a diplomatic facility designed to handle visitors from outside the Human Alliance. The delegation was escorted to comfortable quarters and provided with atmosphere and gravity suitable for their species. The attention to detail suggested extensive experience with alien visitors. Their meeting was with Ambassador Elena Rodriguez, formerly of the Human Embassy on Nexus Prime. She greeted the Council delegation with professional courtesy, but noticeable coolness. With her were representatives from several species the Council had never encountered. A floating jellyfish-like being that communicated through color changes, a metallic creature that spoke in musical tones, and a tall humanoid covered in what looked like living crystal. We appreciate the Council's interest in our activities, Rodriguez began. However, as you may recall, humanity chose to pursue independent development rather than continue seeking Council membership. We have established our own alliances and partnerships out here. Zethis Ka presented the situation carefully. The Void Swarm was consuming entire star systems. Council forces had been unable to stop their advance. Billions of beings were facing extinction. While humanity was not formally obligated to help, surely they would want to prevent such a catastrophe. Rodriguez listened without interruption, occasionally consulting with her alien companions through methods that the Council delegation could not follow. When the presentation was complete, she asked several pointed questions about the Swarm's capabilities and the Council's response efforts. Your military approached this as a conventional war, observed the crystalline being, speaking through a translator device. You tried to match force with force, technology with technology, but this enemy learns from every encounter. The more you fight it directly, the stronger it becomes. The floating jellyfish creature pulsed with different colors as it added, We have encountered similar threats in our home regions. Mechanical devourers that consume all matter and energy in their path. They cannot be defeated by building bigger weapons or stronger defenses. Rodriguez nodded. The Alliance has been preparing for such threats since we established ourselves out here. We've learned from our new partners about the dangers that exist beyond the galactic rim. The Void Swarm is just one of many hazards that the Council has never had to face. She gestured to a holographic display that showed the current extent of the Swarm's invasion. Based on your reports, you have perhaps 6 months before they reach the Council's core systems. After that, it will be too late to mount any effective resistance. The delegation members exchanged worried glances. Their worst fears were being confirmed by someone who clearly understood the threat better than they did. However, Rodriguez continued, the Alliance is not without compassion. Despite the Council's previous treatment of humanity, We are prepared to offer assistance under certain conditions. Zethus-Ka leaned forward eagerly. What conditions? Full council membership for humanity, with immediate voting rights and representation proportional to our population and territory. Recognition of the Human Alliance as an independent political entity, with equal status to the Council itself. Technology sharing agreements that give us access to all Council scientific databases, and territorial concessions that acknowledge our claims to the regions we have settled. The terms were staggering. The Council delegation had been authorized to offer humanity full membership, but the other demands went far beyond anything their leadership had considered. Recognition of the Human Alliance would essentially divide the galaxy between two equal powers. Technology sharing would give humans access to thousands of years of accumulated knowledge. The territorial concessions would formalize humanity's expansion into regions that the Council considered unexplored. These terms, they would fundamentally change the balance of power in the galaxy, Zethus-Ka said carefully. Yes, Rodriguez agreed. They would establish a new order based on cooperation between equals, rather than hierarchy based on age and tradition. The Council would remain the dominant force in its current territory, but it would no longer be the only significant power in the galaxy. The delegation requested time to consult with their leadership. Rodriguez granted them access to quantum communication systems to contact Nexus Prime directly. The negotiations that followed took place over several days, with offers and counteroffers flowing between the Human Alliance and the Council leadership. The discussions were heated. Many Council members were outraged by humanity's demands. The Veltar argued that giving humans equal status would undermine thousands of years of galactic order. The Kethmaran worried about humanity's military potential if they gained access to Council technology. The Zephyrians feared that recognizing the Human Alliance would encourage other species to break away from Council authority. But as reports continued to arrive about the swarm's advance, opposition began to weaken. 3 more star systems had fallen while the negotiations continued. Refugee fleets were streaming toward the core systems, bringing tales of entire civilizations consumed by the mechanical threat. Military commanders were requesting permission to withdraw their forces to more defensible positions. Finally, after much debate, the Council leadership authorized their delegation to accept humanity's terms. They would have their equal partnership and territorial recognition. In exchange, the Human Alliance would deploy their forces against the Void Swarm and share their knowledge of how to combat such threats. Rodriguez received the acceptance with professional satisfaction but no visible celebration. The Alliance appreciates the Council's decision, she said. However, there has been a development that changes our ability to provide immediate assistance. She activated another holographic display showing current intelligence about the swarm's movements. Our analysis indicates that the enemy has learned enough from its encounters with Council forces to mount a final assault on your core systems. They are massing their entire fleet for a coordinated attack that will begin within days. The delegation stared at the display in horror. Thousands of swarm units were converging on the routes leading to Nexus Prime and the other major Council worlds. The mechanical fleet was larger than anything they had previously encountered. The Alliance fleet is not currently in position to intervene in time, Rodriguez continued. Our forces are scattered across multiple systems, engaged in defensive preparations against similar threats in our territory. It would take weeks to assemble a relief force and transport it to Council space. Zethus-Ka felt despair settling over the delegation. They had finally secured humanity's cooperation, only to learn that it would come too late to matter. But Rodriguez was not finished. However, the Alliance has been developing new approaches to combating mechanical devourers. We have technologies and strategies that might be effective against the swarm. We can share this information immediately and provide technical support for implementing it. She looked directly at each delegation member. But you should understand that our methods require significant changes to how you think about warfare. They require cooperation between species, adaptation of existing technologies. The final battle began at dawn on Nexus Prime, though dawn had little meaning with 3 different suns visible in the sky. The Void Swarm emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, thousands of geometric shapes that blotted out the stars. Their approach was methodical, inevitable, like a tide of mechanical death rolling across the galaxy. The Council's defense fleet waited in carefully planned formations around the capital world. Every ship had been modified according to the technical specifications provided by the Human Alliance. Weapons had been recalibrated. Shield systems had been adjusted. Communication networks had been restructured to allow for the kind of rapid coordination that humans had recommended. War leader Gorath commanded the defense from his flagship, surrounded by tactical displays that showed the approaching enemy. The swarm was larger than any force they had faced before. Every unit lost to the mechanical devourers had been analyzed, consumed, and rebuilt into more enemies. The fleet bearing down on them represented the accumulated mass of dozens of conquered star systems. All ships, implement Protocol Chaos on my mark, Gorath commanded, using the human designation for their new tactical approach. The name had initially caused grumbling among his officers, but they had learned to respect the unconventional strategies it represented. The first wave of swarm units entered weapons range, and the battle began unlike any in galactic history. Instead of the organized formations and coordinated fire patterns that had marked previous engagements, the Council forces scattered into seemingly random configurations. Ships moved in unpredictable directions. Weapons fired at irregular intervals. Communication channels buzzed with what sounded like chaos. But beneath the apparent disorder was a deeper pattern that the swarm's mechanical intelligence could not analyze. Human tactical doctrine relied on controlled chaos, organized unpredictability that confused enemies while maintaining just enough coordination to remain effective. Each ship captain had broad discretion to respond to local conditions. Each weapons officer could adapt their fire patterns in real time. Each squadron could split or combine based on immediate tactical needs. The Void Swarm, designed to learn from ordered military responses, found itself facing something it could not categorize. Every time its analysis systems identified a pattern, the pattern changed. Every tactical adaptation it developed was countered by a completely different approach. The mechanical hive mind that had consumed dozens of civilizations encountered something that defied its programming: genuine creativity. For the first time since the invasion began, swarm units began taking significant damage. Weapons that fired in seemingly random patterns found gaps in the enemy's defenses. Ships that moved unpredictably avoided the swarm's response attacks. The tide of battle, which had flowed in only one direction for months, began to shift. But the Council forces were still vastly outnumbered. For every swarm unit they destroyed, 10 more took its place. The mechanical fleet pressed forward with relentless determination, grinding down the defense through sheer mass and persistence. Just as Gorath began preparing for a fighting withdrawal to the planet's surface, space around Nexus Prime erupted with new hyperspace emergent signatures. Hundreds of ships appeared at the edge of the system, moving in formations that no Council military officer had ever seen. The reinforcements were not entirely human. The fleet contained vessels from dozens of different species, each contributing their unique capabilities to a unified whole. Crystalline ships that could phase in and out of normal space. Organic vessels that adapted their shapes during combat. Energy beings that merged temporarily with mechanical craft to enhance their performance. And coordinating it all were human command ships that orchestrated the controlled chaos with unprecedented skill. "This is Admiral Sarah, Chen of the Human Alliance Fleet," came the communication that every Council ship received. "Council forces maintain your current tactical approach. Alliance units implement formation harmony. All ships prepare for synchronized assault." Chen, the former ambassador who had quietly packed her belongings and left Nexus Prime without a word of anger or threat. Now she commanded a fleet that represented something entirely new in galactic warfare. True cooperation between species who trusted each other completely. The battle that followed became known as the Symphony of Chaos. The Alliance fleet moved like a living thing, with each species contributing their strengths while covering others' weaknesses. Human ships provided tactical coordination and adaptive strategies. Crystalline vessels phased through swarm formations to strike from impossible angles. Organic craft absorbed enemy fire and regenerated damage in real time. Energy beings disrupted the swarm's communication networks and sowed confusion in their ranks. Most importantly, the combined fleet fought as humanity had learned to fight, with controlled unpredictability that kept the enemy off balance while maintaining perfect cooperation between allied units. The swarm's hive mind, evolved to counter organized military responses, found itself facing something that operated on completely different principles. The turning point came when human engineers, working with their alliance partners, deployed a weapon that nobody had seen before. Instead of trying to destroy the swarm units through conventional damage, they released a virus into the enemy's communication network. But this was not a virus designed to destroy. It was designed to create. The virus carried within it the concept of individuality. Each swarm unit that received the transmission found its connection to the hive mind altered. Instead of receiving orders and carrying them out without question, they began to experience something unprecedented: choice. The mechanical beings that had operated as a single entity for eons suddenly found themselves thinking as individuals. Some swarm units tried to resist the change, clinging to their collective identity. Others embraced their newfound independence and began questioning orders they had never thought to question before. A few turned their weapons on their former companions, choosing to fight for their own survival rather than the hive's objectives. The Void Swarm, faced with internal conflict for the first time in its existence, began to tear itself apart. Units that had moved in perfect coordination turned on each other. The mechanical tide that had consumed dozens of civilizations collapsed into chaos as each individual unit pursued its own understanding of survival and purpose. The battle ended, not with the destruction of the enemy, but with their transformation. Thousands of former swarm units drifted through space, their hive mind connections severed, their individual consciousness just beginning to emerge. Some were hostile and had to be contained. Others were curious about their new existence. A few actually requested asylum with the Alliance, seeking to understand what they had become. In the aftermath of the battle, as rescue ships searched for survivors and salvage crews began collecting debris, the scale of what had happened became clear. The Council had not just survived the swarm invasion, they had witnessed the birth of an entirely new form of galactic civilization. The Human Alliance represented something that had never existed before, a true partnership between equals where differences were seen as strengths rather than obstacles. Humanity had taken the rejection by the Council and used it as an opportunity to build something better. They had found species that the Council had never encountered and created bonds based on mutual respect rather than hierarchical authority. Admiral Chen's flagship entered orbit around Nexus Prime, and she accepted an invitation to address the Council in person. The chamber where she had once been denied membership was packed with representatives from across the galaxy. But now she spoke not as a supplicant seeking acceptance, but as the leader of an equal power offering partnership. The galaxy is larger and more dangerous than any of us realized, she told the assembled representatives. Beyond the rim lie threats that dwarf even the Void Swarm. Mechanical devourers, energy vampires, reality distorters, and things we don't have names for yet. No single species, no matter how ancient or powerful, can face these dangers alone. She gestured to the displays showing the Alliance fleet still positioned around Nexus Prime. What you saw today was not just a military victory. It was proof that cooperation based on equality is stronger than hierarchy based on tradition. The Alliance offers full partnership to any species willing to contribute to our common defense, while respecting the sovereignty of all members. The response from the Council was immediate and overwhelming. Species after species requested to join the Alliance, recognizing that the old galactic order was no longer adequate for the challenges they faced. Some withdrew from Council space entirely, following humanity's example to build new lives beyond the rim. Others chose to maintain dual membership, serving as bridges between the old civilization and the new. The Galactic Council survived, but it was forever changed. The rigid hierarchies that had governed galactic civilization for millennia gave way to more flexible arrangements. Ancient prejudices were set aside in favor of practical cooperation. The galaxy became a larger, more diverse, and ultimately stronger place. Years later, when historians tried to understand how everything had changed so quickly, they always returned to the same point, the moment when humanity had been denied membership for the 7th time.